Something happened in Cleveland that most people either missed or didn't know how to read properly. Not a press conference, not an announcement, not a depth chart posted on a team website. It happened on a practice field in the middle of a summer Tuesday in front of coaches and teammates and scouts who had been watching every single rep for months. 13 completions, 15 attempts, 5 touchdowns. And when it was over, a few people who had been very loud about this situation went very quiet. That silence told me more than anything that's been said out loud since. I've been watching this Cleveland quarterback situation unfold since last November, and I'll be honest with you, I've been waiting for the moment where the noise stops and the reality becomes undeniable. That moment arrived, and what's interesting is that it didn't arrive with a dramatic press conference or a locker room rebellion or a leaked source going on background to a beat reporter. It arrived exactly the way real organizational decisions always arrive. Quietly, incrementally, through the accumulation of evidence that eventually reaches a tipping point. Shedeur Sanders is at that tipping point, and the Browns, whether they've said it publicly or not, have already crossed it internally. Let me take you through how I arrived at that conclusion, because it requires paying attention to things that most coverage glosses right over. Start with the practice numbers, because I don't want to rush past them the way most people did. 15 attempts, 13 completions, 5 touchdowns. I want you to think about what it actually takes to produce that line in a competitive NFL practice environment. These aren't walkthroughs. These aren't skeleton drills against air. These are live competitive reps against a defense that's being evaluated just as hard as the offense is, against guys who have NFL jobs on the line and every reason to compete. A completion rate that high in that context isn't luck. It isn't a favorable rotation. It isn't a quarterback catching the defense in a soft zone and cashing in on easy windows. That is a quarterback who spent an entire offseason fixing something specific and then demonstrating, publicly on film, in front of everyone who matters, that the fix is real. 5 touchdowns tells you the aggression is there, the willingness to push the ball into the end zone rather than manage safely away from mistakes. That is a confident quarterback operating with conviction, not a guy protecting a roster spot. And here's what really got me. The people who spent the better part of a year building narratives around Shedeur's limitations, the arm strength questions, the concerns about whether he could actually command a professional offense, the suggestion that his rookie year numbers were a product of favorable circumstances on a bad team, they just went quiet. Not pivoting, not recalibrating, not offering a new angle on why the numbers don't mean what they appear to mean. Quiet. And I've been in this long enough to know the difference between a pause and a concession. That was a concession. Now here's where it gets really interesting to me, because the practice field is only half the story. The other half happened at the podium, and if you listen to Andrew Berry's press conference the way most people listen to NFL press conferences, which is passively, with the assumption that nothing real ever gets said, you miss the entire thing. I cannot stress this enough. Front office executives do not speak carelessly. Every word in a press conference is a choice. The praise they offer is intentional. The praise they withhold is just as intentional, maybe more so. And what Berry communicated about Shedeur Sanders in that room was not the language of an open competition. It was the language of an organization that has already made its internal decision and is now managing the public process until the timing is right to formalize it. The word that stopped me was command. Berry said he expects Shedeur to have more command of the offense going into this season. I've been covering this league long enough to know that word doesn't get deployed casually. Command is not developmental language. It is not the kind of thing you say about a player in a genuinely uncertain roster battle. Command is the language organizations use for franchise quarterbacks. Guys the locker room has already started gravitating toward. Guys the offensive system is actively being designed around. Guys for whom the internal organizational conversation is essentially settled even if the press release hasn't been drafted yet. When a general manager stands at a podium and assigns that word to a second-year quarterback with 7 professional starts, he is not hedging. He is communicating, and everyone inside that building understood exactly what was being communicated. Then watch what happened when Berry got handed the perfect opportunity to reassert Deshaun Watson's standing in this competition. A reporter gave him a practically gift-wrapped question. The Pro Bowls, the elite-level performance, the big game moments, the kind of career resume that should translate into some kind of acknowledged competitive advantage over a guy with 7 starts? Berry didn't take it. He acknowledged that experience matters in a general sense, then just stopped. No energy, no conviction. No examples pulled from Watson's actual career to illustrate why the veteran clock should matter here. He flatly declined to frame Watson's experience as a genuine leg up over Shedeur, and the organization that paid $230 million, fully guaranteed and surrendered 3 first-round picks to bring Watson to Cleveland just stood there at the podium and let that door close. Quietly, professionally, without drama, but definitively. I want you to sit with that for a second because it is genuinely remarkable when you think about the financial commitment attached to it. This isn't an organization casually moving on from a one-year veteran on a cheap contract. This is an organization that paid the largest fully guaranteed contract in NFL history, gave up 3 first-round picks, absorbed enormous reputational cost, and is now, in the tone of a press conference, in the energy behind answers about his experience, in the complete absence of conviction when defending his candidacy, essentially announcing that none of that history purchases a single automatic snap over a kid who didn't exist in this league 2 years ago. The financial commitment and the depth chart decision have been fully separated in Cleveland's internal thinking. That is not something organizations do lightly, and it is not something they do publicly unless they are very, very sure. The third angle of this picture was Tylen Green, the 6th-round rookie, and the way Barry handled his portion of the press conference completed the organizational hierarchy in a way that became impossible to misread once you laid all 3 side by side. Green got developmental language, patient, gradual, step-by-step framing with absolutely zero competitive urgency attached to it, which is completely appropriate for a player whose physical ceiling is genuine but whose professional readiness is a long-term project. But the analytical power of that comparison isn't about Green individually. It's about what happens when you put 3 quarterbacks through the same press conference filter and watch how the language changes. One quarterback receives specific, concrete praise about real areas that translate to Sunday performance: decision-making, pocket management, ball security, situational awareness, and the word command sitting at the top of all of it. One quarterback receives bare acknowledgement that a career exists, offered without energy or examples. One quarterback receives patient developmental talk with no urgency anywhere near it. That is not how you talk about 3 players in a genuine open competition. That is a front office communicating its internal organizational structure through the deliberate architecture of public language. Barry also confirmed that the rep distribution will not be equal. Performance drives the split, not a predetermined schedule designed to create the appearance of fairness. And when you put that statement directly next to the command language and the Watson non-defense, the roadmap becomes completely visible. An unequal rep structure that follows performance in an environment where one quarterback just went 15 for 17 with 5 touchdowns and the general manager is using franchise quarterback language to describe his trajectory. You don't need to be an analyst to see where that distribution is already pointing. What really pulls the whole picture together for me, though, is the offseason construction surrounding all of this, because roster decisions reveal organizational thinking in ways that press conference language sometimes can't. The Spencer Fano pick at 9th overall was not a generic offensive line upgrade. NFL teams do not spend top 10 draft capital on generic anything. That was a franchise-level commitment to protecting a specific quarterback who spent his entire rookie season absorbing punishment behind one of the most structurally inadequate offensive lines in the conference. And I want to be precise about why that matters developmentally, because it goes beyond the obvious physical protection argument. Young quarterbacks who take unnecessary hits early in their careers don't just risk physical injury. They develop psychological adaptations to dangerous environments that can be extremely difficult to reverse. They start anticipating pressure before it materializes. They release the ball early, they stop trusting their own processing speed, and start playing scared. That is not a correctable technique flaw you address in film sessions. That is a deep cognitive adaptation to a threatening environment, and it can linger for years even after the environment has been made safe. The Cleveland front office taking Fino at 9 is the organization declaring, in the language of actual draft capital, that they will not allow their quarterback's development to be derailed by the same structural negligence that compromised his rookie year. The receiver acquisitions operate on exactly the same logic, and this is where I think the organizational thinking gets genuinely sophisticated. The route-running precision of conception, the contested catch red zone ability Boston brings, these are not interchangeable skill set upgrades that any quarterback could exploit equally. These are pieces selected to complement the specific strengths of a specific quarterback. A signal caller who processes fast, delivers accurately into tight windows, and reads coverage at a high level needs receivers who create consistent, clean separation rather than guys who require the quarterback to manufacture completions through pure arm strength against closing coverage. A quarterback whose delivery is built on timing and precision rather than pure velocity needs weapons who can win the catch before the window collapses, not after. Every free agency decision, every draft selection, every roster construction choice from this offseason connects back to a central organizational conviction about who their quarterback is and what he specifically needs to succeed. That is not generic roster building. That is intentional infrastructure construction around a defined quarterback identity. And this is where I'll be direct with Browns fans because they deserve honesty rather than manufactured optimism. I've watched Cleveland go through these cycles. The promising young quarterback who generates real excitement in the spring, the press conference energy, the genuine belief that this time the organizational commitment is real. And then the structural failures that undermine the development before it ever gets a real chance to prove itself. What's different here is the specificity of the commitment. Previous cycles were built on hope and potential without the structural conditions that make genuine development actually possible. This one is built on something more concrete. The protection is being physically constructed around this quarterback. The weapons are being selected with his actual demonstrated strengths in mind. The coaching philosophy is aligned behind honest evaluation rather than the obligation of prior financial commitments. The rep distribution is being designed to follow merit rather than politics or contractual seniority, and the general manager is using language at the podium that reflects real internal conviction rather than diplomatic protection of a sunk cost. The formal announcement hasn't happened yet, the official depth chart hasn't been posted. The press conference where someone stands at a microphone and says the words directly and without diplomatic cushioning hasn't been scheduled. But the practice field made the announcement that actually matters. Incrementally, specifically, convincingly, one completed pass at a time. The people inside that Cleveland facility who have been watching every rep and every film session and every small unremarkable moment that accumulates into a real evaluation have already stopped acting like the conversation is genuinely open. The coaches know, the front office knows, the teammates know. The critics who built careers on the skepticism have gone quiet in a way that is itself a form of acknowledgement. Shedeur Sanders keeps walking onto that field every day and making it harder for anyone inside that building to pretend the question hasn't been answered. The era isn't approaching anymore. It's already here. Cleveland just hasn't said it out loud yet. But they will. And when they do, nobody who was actually paying attention is going to be surprised.